This just handed to me. Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
During the 1979-1980 TV season, the strain of producing Saturday Night Live was wearing on Lorne Michaels. Two of his original cast members, Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, had left the show before the season had started, and the contracts for the rest of the cast were about to expire, along with his own. Star Gilda Radner had already announced that she wasn't planning to renew, and the rest were on the fence. Michaels was also experiencing budgetary pressure from the network and was starting to think about moving on to new projects. He suggested that both he and the show go on a year's hiatus and come back restructured. If that wasn't possible, he wanted his two right-hand men, writers Al Franken and Tom Davis, to take over the job of running the show, with him overseeing them as executive producer. His negotiations with the network were going well. And then Al Franken opened his big mouth.
Fred Silverman. Now, here's a guy who is a total, unequivocal failure.
Silverman took the monologue as not only a personal insult, but a sign that Michaels was no longer interested in negotiating a new deal with the network. Without even bothering to tell Michaels about his decision, he hired the show's associate producer, Gene Domanian, to replace Michaels and let Michaels' contract lapse. Once word got out about the promotion of Domanian, who had no experience with the writing side of the show, the remaining original cast members finally decided to not renew their contracts, and the vast majority of the writing staff also decided to leave. Domanian's first move was to approach recently promoted cast member Harry Shearer about staying with the show and taking over as head writer. Shearer said he was interested, but he wanted to also be the one to recruit the new cast members and oversee most of the show's production. In essence, he wanted to run the show with Domanian just overseeing him. She said no, and Shearer also left. To be the show's new head writer, Domanian tapped, While best known then and now for his musical career and hit instrumental classical gas, Mason Williams had a number of comedy credits on his resume, including winning an Emmy for his writing on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in 1968. Domanian hoped that his experience would help make up for her lack of writer's credentials. For her new cast, Domanian cast her net wide, auditioning a number of rising stars. One wonders what the show would have been like if she'd hired some of the people she auditioned.
It's Saturday Night Live! Starring Jim Carrey, John Goodman, Paul Rubens.
But instead, we got...
Starring Kenny Dillon, Gilbert Gottfried, Gail Mathias, Joe Piscopo, Ann Risley, and Charles Rocket.
Since NBC needed the show's Studio 8H for election coverage, as it had done 4 years earlier, the start of the new season was pushed back until November 15th, and it was promoted heavily.
From New York, Saturday Night Live is live again. Saturday Night Live, the next generation's premiere.
The show was on track to... not even I can pretend that it had any chance. The new cast debuted with a cold open that, instead of drawing a line under what had gone before and letting the show start fresh, insisted on drawing comparisons between the new guys and the beloved cast members who had all left.
Relax. What are they going to do? Start without us? You're going to be just fine on this show. Sort of a cross between Gilda and Jane. You're the one...
Go kind of a cross between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ann Risley. Hi. Kind of a cross between Gilda and Lorraine.
Including one swipe at a certain performer who had turned Domanian down.
Gilbert Gottfried, I'm kind of a cross between John Belushi and That guy from last year, he did the Rod Serling, nobody could remember his name.
Harry. Yeah.
It was an unfair comparison, but it was one they insisted on making themselves. And making the transition even harder, the show's writing also suffered by comparison. While Mason Williams may have been groundbreaking and edgy by 1968 standards, by 1980 that style of humor was old hat and one of the things that the original Saturday Night Live had been rebelling against. And the more Williams' writing staff tried to be edgy and dangerous, the worse it became. Here are a few examples.
Good evening, I'm Charles Rocket. Here now the news. In Las Vegas, where none of the hotels and casinos conform to present city fire codes and where ladders only reach the 9th floor, many of the taller hotels, in an effort to reassure their guests, have incorporated the special linen fire escape devices pictured here.
Begin here, touching this. Use this to probe that. Check to see if there's anything like that. Then glide that along like this, like that, to see if there's anything like this or that.
How can a soldier, it's remarkable, how can one soldier know when another soldier is homosexual?
That's really quite easy. Say I've pulled guard duty and I come across Corporal Thomas here. Halt, soldier, who goes there?
Corporal Peter Thomas, homo number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 2.
What was Judy Garland's first movie?
Pigskin Parade, sir.
Who's the mayor of San Francisco?
Dianne Feinstein, sir.
How many of the village people are really gay?
2. The others are imposters, sir.
In Peking this week, the trial of the famous Gang of Four began. The central figure in that trial is Shang Qin, widow of the Mao Zedong. Nancy Reagan, noting that Madame Mao, like herself, is a former movie star, former movie actress, accused of manipulating thousands of party officials while her aging husband was in power. Said Nancy, "Boy, I'm glad I live in America."
Good evening, and welcome to the Leather Report. Leather Weather Report. I'm your leather weather girl, Thelma Thunder. And this is our weather map, John.
Well, pictured here is Reagan's choice for a new cabinet post, Secretary of Milk.
So, who are we?
We're the mean majority. We're very, very mean. Who are we mean to? Just about everybody.
We believe that the vast majority of Americans, in their hearts, are like us. Mean. And these last 20 years of civil rights was just an attempt to be nice.
Those days are over. And you know who told us so. He's like us, mean.
Are they easy to spot, Uncle Lester?
Well, sometimes they is and sometimes they ain't. If they's demonstrating like commies tend to do, it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Well, what if they ain't demonstrating?
Well, hell, Jim Bob, all you got to do is just shoot yourself a Jew or a nigger. Chances are better than even you'll be shooting a commie, anywho.
Yes, Grace, I'm ready and willing. Now, your letter says here that your chosen method of suicide is self-punishment.
Yes, Grace, that's right. I will be beating myself to death with the hardcover edition of The Joy of Cooking.
One of the few bright spots for the show, however, did manage to show up in the season's second episode.
Join us tonight as we go in search of the Negro Republican.
19-year-old Eddie Murphy had been pushing the show's new talent coordinator, Neil Levy, to let him audition for the show, but Damanian didn't want him. She was planning to hire Robert Townsend to be, and I quote, the black cast member. Levy got Murphy into a sketch in the second episode without any lines, but his joking around backstage caught attention. The following week, they had him do a monologue on Weekend Update.
The other big story this week, Cleveland judge ruling all high school basketball teams must have 2 white players. Fair in just comment. Cleveland high school student Raheem Abdul Muhammad. What's the story, Raheem?
Yo, baby. Look, I've been a junior at Cleveland High going on 7 years now. I'd like to tell y'all that this is the most disgusting thing y'all done pulled up to date. We ain't got much, I say at least let us have basketball. There's nothing sacred. Anytime we get something going good, y'all got to move in on it. In the 60s, we wore platform shoes, then y'all had to wear platform shoes. In the early 70s, we braided our hair, then in the late 70s, y'all had to braid your hair. Now it's 1980. We on welfare, and by the end of next year, y'all gonna be on welfare too.
And getting the biggest, well, let's be honest, practically the only laughs of the night, was all it took. Murphy was moved up to be a featured player and became a full cast member by episode 7. But even the rise of Eddie Murphy couldn't help the show's trajectory. Audiences missed the original cast and the recurring characters that they'd grown to know and love, and the ratings kept slipping. The writing stagnated, and Williams quickly quit after a final argument with Domanion. As a result, the show became, if anything, even more directionless. And then things came to a head on February 21st. With Dallas star Charlene Tilton as host, the writers decided to parody the Who Shot JR cliffhanger with a supposed attempt to kill cast member Charles Rocket. Then, to fill time at the end of the episode, right before the credits, Rocket stepped over the line.
Charlie, how are you feeling now after you've been shot?
Oh, man, it's the first time I've ever been shot in my life. I'd like to know who the fuck did it.
And that was all it took. Complaints flooded into both NBC and the FCC about the show's close, and the suits felt they needed to act. When the next scheduled episode aired 2 weeks later, it started with a cold open with guest host and former cast member Bill Murray reassuring the cast that things would be okay.
Bother you. You know, it takes a long time to get started. I mean, a whole new cast, all new writers. Yeah, right. What do they expect, you know? Yeah. The ratings are still fine, you know, but even if your ratings went up higher than the old show, you know, people would still say the old show was better, you know?
That's true.
Maybe it was.
But one ad-lib from Murray put paid to any hope of people forgetting about the incident from the previous episode.
And watch your mouth. Clean it up. Who are you?
Bill Murray, no problem at all. Right? Just like he said, it just doesn't matter.
It really doesn't matter. Hey, we're going to take care of you, huh? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
But the fact is, it did matter. One person watching this scene from the booth was Dick Ebersol, the network's former director of weekend late-night programming, and the man who had hired Lorne Michaels in the first place. No one in the cast knew that Ebersol was there to observe, because he had already been hired to replace Domanion as soon as the episode was over. Then the following Monday, Ebersol took the reins and immediately fired Gilbert Gottfried, Ann Risley, and Charles Rocket. He replaced them with comedian Tim Kazurinsky and SCTV cast members Tony Rosado and Catherine O'Hara. He also fired most of the writing staff and brought in former SNL writer Michael O'Donoghue to run the writer's room. Catherine O'Hara lasted about an hour as a cast member. She fought with O'Donoghue at the first writers' meeting and decided the show just wasn't for her. She suggested Robin Duke replace her. When the show returned from a month's hiatus for retooling, it started with guest star Chevy Chase looking through a storage closet, reminiscing about the show's glory days.
My God.
Mrs. Area, healing.
Hello? Mr. Hoffa?
He also encountered another former cast member of sorts.
Thanks a lot for getting me out of here. Don't feel that way. Hey, look, we can make a comeback, huh? Hey, and, they were even talking to me about anchoring Weekend Update. Say, maybe you can do those funny faces behind my back like you used to, huh? Hey, that'd be funny.
That's a funny idea.
Hey, what's that?
Then, during Weekend Update, Ebersol even welcomed back the man who had caused the whole disaster, Al Franken, to explain things in his own inimitable style.
Mr. Al Franken. I don't want to be cruel to Gene, because it might make you think less of me, Al Franken. Anyway, it took NBC 12 shows to figure out their horrendous mistake, and a month ago they fired Gene. Okay, now, who do they pick to rectify the original error? Someone who knows what he's doing? Someone like me? Al Franken? No, they picked Dick Ebersol. Now, I know Dick because he was a network executive in charge of late-night programming when Saturday Night started, and as such, was the first person to steal credit for the success of Saturday Night. Credit which should rightfully go to Lorne Michaels and me, Al Franken. Okay. Now, the show's going to be a little better. No English-speaking person could do a worse job than Gene.
Franken and Davis were supposed to host the following week's show, which Ebersol hoped would cement his attempt to return to the show's old formula, which had worked so well. But the following week, the Writers Guild went on strike, which brought the production of Saturday Night Live and just about every other television show to a screeching halt. Bowing to the reality of the strike, Ebersol canceled the rest of the season. He also decided to fire Denny Dillon and Gail Mathias, leaving only Joe Piscopo from Domanian's original cast. He also made one more surprise firing.
This is Don Pardo saying, I'm the one who shot Charlie Rocket. I found him fooling around with my wife, the lovely Mrs. Don Pardo. I used a Smith & Wesson 32, which I purchased from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago 60609.
With the firing of Don Pardo, Ebersol not only divested himself of most of the Domanian era, but the final connection with the original Saturday Night Live. Piscopo and Murphy would help carry the show for a few years, and then inertia carried it on for another, until Lorne Michaels returned in 1985. Under Michaels' direction, the show eventually rebounded, becoming the kind of TV institution that the original show fought hard to distinguish itself from. But one is still left to wonder what would have happened if Red Silverman had been able to take a joke, or Al Franken had managed to keep his big mouth shut. In the end, it was Harry Shearer who got the last word, summing up the Domanian era years later by saying, "There are two ways of doing things, the right way and Saturday Night Live."